Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's always nice to bring that room to a hush, all those good, intense discussions going on. Hopefully we'll keep that going throughout the day. Welcome. It's wonderful to see all of you here this morning. My name's Peter Kelly. I'm Director of the Poverty Alliance. Before I say a few words of introduction, let me do the usual kind of housekeeping tasks. So, fire alarm, we have none expected. One day I'm going to say there's a fire alarm expected and tell you what to do, but there are no fire alarms expected. If there is a fire alarm, then staff from the Royal Concert Hall will lead you out. There's fire, I'm just turned into a flight attendant now, fire exits at the back and at the side. Toilets you will probably have found, they're on this floor, round by the coffee and round by the Lomond Suite. Phones, we want you to keep them on because we want you to tweet about what you're hearing, what you're listening about. There's a hashtag up there that you can use, but please keep them on silent so as not to disturb others. There is Wi-Fi. You can find that in the usual way by connecting. One last thing is anyone who requires expenses for being here today, please see my colleague Isla or any of the other administration team at the front desk at lunchtime, please. So try and make sure that you see Isla then. So it's great to have you all back in this room again. This is the second big in-person conference that we've ran since the pandemic. I know it's going to be not only an interesting discussion, it's always an interesting discussion at Poverty Alliance events, I think, but this is an important one too. It's one that I think will give us greater clarity as campaigners, as activists, about how we can practically realise some of the potential that the minimum income guarantee holds. And I think the experience over the last few years has underlined just how much we need a new approach in Scotland and across the UK to ensuring that everyone has enough. Bless you. The cost of living crisis and the pandemic have shown us that at times we all need a safety net when our incomes fall or when prices rise. There are times when we all need services that don't cost the earth, that are readily accessible. We all need safe and secure homes, and we all need jobs that pay well, that allow us to progress and support our well-being, and that help us create stronger communities. A minimum income guarantee has the potential to provide that security that we all need, to transform our society. I think a word that we'll hear several times today, real transformational potential, and to create the kind of Scotland where the right to an adequate standard of living is more than just a phrase, more than just a slogan. Today's conference, I think, is an opportunity to set out why we need a minimum income guarantee and, more importantly, how we can get there. And that's broadly our agenda for the day. The morning, we'll look at why, and in the afternoon, we'll spend a bit more time on the how. How do we actually get there? So we're setting out on a journey today, I think. Many of us have been talking about minimum income guarantee for several years, but for many people in this room, this will perhaps be the first time you've had a chance to discuss it. So please remember to ask lots of questions, and like any journey, it has to start somewhere, and we're starting, I think, with a really excellent plenary session. First, we'll hear from Shirley-Anne Somerville, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice in the Scottish Government. Shirley-Anne has been an MSP since 2007, was formerly Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills. She's also been Cabinet Secretary for Social Security and Older People, and really importantly, co-chair of the expert group on the minimum income guarantee. So there's really no one better to kick off our discussions today. So please welcome the Cabinet Secretary, Shirley-Anne Somerville.
Thanks very much, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, to be able to take part in this conference and to begin what I hope is a very fruitful day of discussion that you're going to have, particularly on the minimum income guarantee. And I very much welcome that focus for today because, as you've heard, this is an idea which has been talked about in some circles for some time, but we're very keen as a government to see how we can move that discussion forward into something now approaching reality. And it will be a journey, but it's a journey that we are keen to have you all on board on and to get your ideas as we move through. So the minimum income guarantee is quite an innovative idea, but it is there to meet the challenges that we know people are facing right across Scotland. We know that life is still far too precarious for far too many households in our communities. And we know, as a government, but also I hope as a society, that it's our obligation to do something about that. Now, in response to this challenge that I think we all have, we do have to see if we can find a way to allow people to have security, not just surviving, but a secure foundation to thrive. And that's a very important point. Now, to achieve this, yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, there will be challenges. But we will be able to confront those challenges with a good discussion about how we can go over them. And the entire purpose of a minimum income guarantee is in effect to provide assurance that no one will fall below a certain set income level, and that will allow for a dignified and a secure life. Now, the work to develop proposals for a minimum income guarantee began following the 2021 programme for government. Within that first 100 days, that independent expert group has been set up, of which the Poverty Alliance are members. And I know several other members of that group are here today and contributing as well, Chris included. So you'll hear from different perspectives about how that work is going. Now, they have been tasked with reporting to the Scottish Government on proposals for a minimum income guarantee, but importantly working alongside an expert by experience panel to shape the work based on their own experiences of financial insecurity. Now, the group published its interim report in March 2023, and I was delighted to receive the initial recommendations, which I've now responded to in detail. And I want to thank the group again for the massive amount of work that I know went into that interim report. It did acknowledge that the full potential of a minimum income guarantee might not be realised under the current devolutionary setup and without full legislative powers. But it did very clearly set out that we can take steps towards that goal. And that's what I'm very keen to look at with the group when they're producing their final report, which is due in 2024. This can be the start of a real transformational change for Scotland, the beginning of that fairer and more prosperous society that we all want to see. Now, we have also, of course, the limitations and realities of where we are at present. So the report, I hope, will also be focused on it being deliverable and what's fiscally possible now. But again, where is that on a journey to ensure that we are challenging ourselves to continue to go further and to see how we can develop this proposal in real time. So the minimum income guarantee could be achieved, for example, through a combination of fair and accessible paid work, high-quality services that reduce household costs, and adequate social security. Events like today's conference are essential in shaping the direction and laying the foundations for that meaningful change, and I look forward to hearing your suggestions. But I'm sure that many, if not all indeed, in the room will be disappointed about the UK Government's autumn statement and that missed opportunity to introduce an essentials guarantee, something which we had asked for. You'll also be well aware that we are experiencing very tough financial circumstances as a Scottish Government, the toughest that we have ever seen under devolution. But we have taken decisions to prioritise spending on cost of living support and tackling child poverty. One of the aspects that does make that more difficult is the fact that we continue, quite rightly, to mitigate against some of the worst excesses of the UK welfare state. Around £127 million is currently spent mitigating against some UK welfare reform. For example, £84 million on the bedroom tax, further money on the benefit cap, and also looking to see what we can do in other areas as well. Now, that money could and should be getting spent in other ways, and other anti-poverty measures. But it is important at this time that we do continue to try and mitigate against some of the worst excesses of what we're seeing. But there is only so much that we can mitigate against. There are a number of challenges that are in effect baked in to universal credit, whether it's the inadequacy of payments, the two-child limit, the young parent penalty, and then importantly, and particularly given some of the announcements made this week to extend them still further, punitive sanctions regimes. We know they all impact on children and families, and indeed others, in our communities day in, day out. And we know that they push people into poverty. Almost half of the individuals in families in receipt of universal credit and legacy benefits it's replacing were in poverty in 21-22. Now, those poverty figures speak volumes, but they cannot fully convey the real human cost that we know lie behind those figures. Because for every person that's involved in that, it's an individual under stress, under strain, and under great pressure. And we can never forget that behind those figures are real people in real poverty, facing real difficulties day in, day out. So we do need to challenge ourselves as a government up here in Scotland to see what more we can do to get away from the insecure income that many people still have, unfortunately. Now, we've just seen this month that the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, when talking about poverty levels in the UK, said, and I quote, that the policies in place are not working and are not protecting people from poverty. Follows on from an earlier report, which also said that British compassion has been replaced by a punitive, mean-spirited and often callous approach, apparently designed to impose a rigid order on the lives of those least capable of coping. Now, I would caveat that cope with the fact that I would add the British government's approach, not in fact think many people in society, whether that's Scotland or elsewhere. But we do know that the levels of universal credit have been too low for too long, and that's why we joined with many organisations, including many that are here today, to call on the UK government to establish an essentials guarantee to ensure people receive sufficient support to help them with everyday basic needs. The GRF recently reported that 90% of low-income households on universal credit are currently going without essentials. Those are the people that we want and can protect through a minimum income guarantee. Now, tackling poverty and creating a more equal society is integral to the work of the Scottish Government, and tackling poverty and protecting people from harm is one of the First Minister's 3 missions. Now, we're committed to using our relatively fixed budget and the limited powers that we have to reach our targets of substantially reducing child poverty. And with Best Start Bright Futures, our second Tackling Child Poverty delivery plan, setting out the action we will take together with partners. Reducing household costs have been a vital pillar to that approach, and that has become even more important as we look at the greater pressures that are already being faced by households as their incomes continually stretch further and further. That's why we took action to triple the Fuel Insecurity Fund to try and protect people from some of the worst excesses of high energy costs. It's why we've expanded free school meals universally to primaries 1 to 5, saving families around £400 a year, with more universality to come in primary 6 and 7. And it's also why we're providing 1140 free childcare for 3 and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds. But as well as supporting people with immediate costs, We do recognise that well-paid work can be an effective route out of poverty. The days are unfortunately no longer with us where work was immediately a route out of poverty, or that was something that could be taken for granted. So it is important that it's well-paid and secure work. And that's why employability support is so important. Why we've taken the approach to strengthen fair work, introducing, for example, a requirement on public sector grant recipients to pay at least the real living wage to all employees, and to provide appropriate channels for an effective worker's voice. And of course, since the passing of the Social Security Act in 2018, we've established a radically different social security system, built on dignity, fairness and respect. We've shown that you can deliver social security in a very, very different way. Now, we've now got 14 benefits being delivered by Social Security Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Government, 7 of which are forms of financial support that are only available in Scotland. That's an investment spend of about £12 billion up to March 2023. Now, you compare that to the UK Government's approach that still continues, it would appear, to be all about dismantling the welfare system. It seems committed to ongoing austerity. And as we can see from the recent changes to the work capability assessment and the sanctions announced by the DWP just this week, these show no signs of abating. The changes in effect that we've seen being announced will effectively force people who have health conditions, whose health conditions have not changed, they will suddenly find themselves badged fit for work or fit to prepare for work. And that rebranding means one thing and one thing only. They will lose money, and they will lose money at a time where they cannot afford to do so. And with that, with the fear of sanctions and further sanctions on top of those that we already have, there will be more fear and more anxiety. So what can we do as part of a minimum income guarantee that can't take away those sanctions because it's not within our power, but what can we do to help protect those people from that fear and that insecurity and essentially that harm, both financially and emotionally? How can we use our limited powers, but they are still substantial powers and important powers, how can we use them to protect those people? Well, while we're prioritising lifting children out of poverty, we're also looking very carefully, as I say, about what more needs to be done for others, the disabled, carers, people who are being hit by that work capability assessment. Now, the impact, of course, on families is very important, and that's exactly why we have the Scottish Child Payment in Scotland, the only tackling child poverty benefit in the UK. In the space of a year, we've increased that by 150%. That shows, I hope, our commitment as a government to tackling child poverty, which we know the levels of which are still too high. Now, Professor Danny Dorling recently said that that payment had delivered, and I quote, the biggest fall in child poverty anywhere in Europe for at least 40 years. Now, I take great heart from that, but I don't take any solace from the idea that our work is complete or in any way complete, because we know, as I say, that poverty levels, particularly for children and families, still remain too high, and there are still too many children and families in poverty in Scotland. So it's also important that we make the most out of the payments that we have. That's why we will vigorously encourage people to apply for the benefits that are entitled to, that they're entitled to. And I would strongly encourage those, if you have not all done so already, to go and introduce yourselves to my Social Security Scotland colleagues that I see have a stand outside, to see how they can link with your organisations and use that outreach work to encourage people to get what they are entitled to. Because we are working on the basis that social security is your human right. And that is a very important, again, difference and a foundation that we can use as part of our work on the minimum income guarantee. So as we look at what we can do, whether it's using social security, whether it's using fair work, or whether it's using some of the other powers that we already have in Scotland, we can use all that, yes, to reflect on what we've achieved so far, but also to look forward to seeing how we can use those powers differently, how we can think of things in a different way, in a more innovative way. And again, that's why the minimum income guarantee work is so important. It's innovative, it's different, it's not something that can be done overnight, but it is something that we can challenge ourselves to deliver on over time and with the initial steps within our grasp already. So I very much look forward to what comes out of today, to hope that, yes, there's some suggestions, some challenge about how we can move forward and how we can move forward at pace using our abilities within the Scottish Parliament, because the need, as we all know, is great, and the time has never been better for us to react to that positively, with hope and together. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cabinet Secretary. I think really gave us the outline for our whole discussion for the rest of the day, looking at those themes around social security, work, services. Those are the things that we're going to discuss and some of the challenges around those areas. I now have a real pleasure of introducing the rest of our panel. We're going to hear from Polly Jones, the head of Trussell Trust in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and then Chris Birt, the Associate Director of Joseph Rowntree Foundation in Scotland. And I'm not going to embarrass them with detailed biographical introductions. Just to say, I think we do have on the stage with us in the shape of Polly and Chris, two of the most real formidable campaigners, anti-poverty campaigners that we have in Scotland. So I'm really pleased to have them here with us today. Before I introduce Polly, I can see there's a few people standing around the back. There are some seats still at the front, so if you can find your way through the crowd, there are seats here at the front. But over to you, Polly. Thanks very much.
Just give folks a chance to sit down. Good morning, though. Lovely to see you all. So a generation of people are growing up thinking that it's normal to have a food bank in every community. And it's not right. Food bank use is soaring. 1.2 million people just in Scotland are experiencing food insecurity, worrying about how they're going to get the next meal for their kids, eking out food so that meals are spread thinly across a week, skipping meals altogether. And this has been increasing dramatically over the last few years, 40% in just the last 5 years in the number of parcels food banks across Scotland have given out. We know that a food parcel is distributed will be distributed this winter every 8 seconds. That's another food parcel. That quick. Everybody, all of you, will be living near a food aid provider in your community, in your neighbourhood. And just like with every form of poverty and inequality, some people are hit hardest. 3 in 4 people who visit food banks in Scotland are disabled or live with somebody who's disabled. Despite the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment, which has made a big impact, we're still giving out more parcels to families with children now than we ever have before. 1 in 5 folk who come to food banks in Scotland have experience of the care system, which is such a symbolic demonstration of where support and things have gone wrong and haven't been good enough. 1 in 6 people who visit food banks in Scotland have a job or live in a house where somebody works. So we know work isn't doing its job either. And it's really clear that people are forced to come to a food bank because they don't have enough money. They can't afford to buy food and all the other things that we need to live. And for almost everybody that visits a food bank, their main form of income is social security, usually universal credit. It is clearly not providing security. Let's see if I can get the slides to work. in the spirit of the conference and all of your drawing of lines, let's look at this line. This is what has happened to universal credit and its predecessors since the 1950s. Now, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I wondered if there's anyone in the room who was born in 1949 or before. I know there's some long-standing determined campaigners that are part of the Poverty Alliance's networks. Maybe they're a bit shy. Maybe there's somebody here. But this is what's been happening since 1950, and you can see the comparison here with this line of what people would be getting from average earnings and what you receive through universal credit. And it's really dropped. And I think this is important because it begins to show us and explain a bit about your experiences with your organisations in your communities and why you're seeing people coming for support that you maybe haven't seen before. Standard allowance in universal credit is just £85 a week for a single adult over 25, because for some reason the UK government thinks if you're under 25, somehow everything's cheaper. And we already know Social Security isn't providing security, but it's also not providing anything that really resembles a system. There is absolutely no logic or rationale in what you get for that £85 and what it's meant to cost. There is no link at all between £85 and what it costs you to live, your living costs. So if you look at this slide, we started to look at what are the absolute essentials to live. We asked lots of groups in the public, what do you need? What are the absolute essentials? We talked to people who are visiting food banks. What are the things you're always short of that you need to find money for? We also asked people, what are you prepared to contribute to as part of your taxes to make sure we've got a social security safety net available for everybody? And this is what people told us. You can see that there's £37 a week for food for a single person. I think it's interesting to look that the calculations come out at there's £6 a week, which is probably going to be about to save up for second-hand clothes. £16 for travel, 4 bus journeys. We can also see on here you've got £8 for communications. That's maybe to make sure that you can engage with your universal credit online application, because a lot of that is obviously done digitally now. This isn't a luxury lifestyle. It's not even comfortable. It is just the essentials, and it might prevent you needing to come to a food bank. But when you add all of that up, you come to a total of £120 a week. £35 more than you get from a standard allowance from universal credit. This is why so many people are hungry, so many people are coming to food banks, so many people are burdened by anxiety about debt and how they're going to pay the bills. So let's look at some more lines. On this graph, you can see the green line for single people and couples, showing where the essentials line would be. And you can see how far below universal credit standard allowance sits for both groups. We've already included in here too, so you can just compare it against people under 25. So you can see this gap, the gap from standard allowance to the cost of essentials for both groups of people. And this is the gap where here it's blank, but you know what's in that gap. That is debt, anxiety, hunger, being cold at home, insecurity. That's where the 1.2 million people who are experiencing food insecurity across Scotland, that's where they're sitting. And if you look on this slide, we can see actually that the reality is even worse for many more people, because 2/3 of folk visiting food banks don't even receive £85 in standard allowance because large amounts are deducted from them. Deducted because they've asked for a benefit advance to cover 5 weeks at least at the start of a universal credit claim where there's no income coming in at all. Deductions because of debt that's being paid back to public bodies. Deductions because somebody's made an administrative error 15 years ago and now you're having to pay it back. So for many people, they're way below being able to afford the cost of essentials. So this is why, together with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Trussell Trust launched a campaign earlier in the year called Guarantee Our Essentials. Like many of you, we've been pretty frustrated with social security and universal credit for a long time. We know that's driving people to use food banks, and most people who are struggling don't come to food banks at all. So we've launched this campaign. We're calling on the UK government to introduce an essentials guarantee into universal credit. Now, I realise that probably doesn't sound very ambitious. It's nothing like a minimum income guarantee. But if you've been paying attention to the news this week in the autumn statement, this would be transformative in the context of UK government social security policy. So we're asking the UK government specifically to introduce an essentials guarantee into universal credit, to set up an independent body that would work out how much essentials actually cost. We've done some indicative figures, but inflation is still going up. Those figures might not be right. We need an independent body to do it, maybe like the Low Pay Commission sets the level for the minimum wage. And we also want the UK government to guarantee that nothing would pull you below that deductions can't pull you below. If we say this is what essentials cost, that's what they cost. We're not going to say this is what it is and then make it even harder, utterly impossible for you. So we'd love you to use this very fancy QR code. We're way past website links these days. You can use this sitting right there in your seat to sign a petition to your MP asking them to support an essentials guarantee. We'd like your organisations, local, national, UK-wide, to sign up to this campaign as well. We really welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to support the Essentials Guarantee, to join others in the campaign calling on the UK Government to introduce an Essentials Guarantee, the first government in the UK to do that. But I think there's more work that can be done. And today we're all going to be talking about the minimum income guarantee, which, as you'll hear shortly, sets the standard even higher, goes beyond how do we cover the essentials to what do we need to live a good life and to thrive. So if the minimum income guarantee is up here and the essentials guarantee should be the absolute bottom, how do we get there? And I think one of the questions, responding to what you were saying, Shirley-Anne, about what the Scottish Government can do, is looking at whether the commitment to the Essentials Guarantee, the recognition of what things actually cost needing to be baked into our social security system, does this help provide us and the Scottish Government with a bit of a route map to how to get towards the minimum income guarantee? For example, do Scottish benefits, the 14 that you've introduced and are responsible for, do they link to the cost of essentials? Can we do that? Could the Scottish Government top up, using the same model that we have with Scottish Choices, top up universal credit for people in Scotland to cover the cost of essentials? And just in closing, so Peter's not panicking about my time, all of us in this room have experience of working with people, have experience ourselves of what it means that our social security system utterly fails to meet the cost of essentials, utterly fails to provide security, utterly fails to deliver on a system. And so as charities, as third sector organisations, as proud members of an anti-poverty alliance, there's much we can do to show what's going on, to hold a mirror up to what we can see firsthand in our communities, to help policymakers and those with power on our governments to do something about it. We can step in and we can support, of course, with people as well. But what we cannot do, what only governments can do, is to deliver a social security system that works. So, Cabinet Secretary, to you, to your colleagues in the Scottish Government, to the UK Government, over to you to deliver a social security system for us all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Polly. As I said, formidable campaigners, really strong messages there. Again, ones that we'll reflect on, and we'll have some time for questions in just a minute. I'm now going to introduce Chris Birt, Associate Director for Joseph Rowntree Foundation in Scotland. Chris is not only the Associate Director, or prior to becoming Associate Director, worked in the First Minister's office, so he's had a hand in helping design policies, so maybe we can learn a bit from that as well. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Peter. Polly is always a tough act to follow, particularly when you're losing your voice. But if she's, I was thinking I could make a joke because Polly's name is Polly Jones, so she's PJ, and I could be Duncan. But then I appreciated that joke, which I can assure you is hilarious, would only be hilarious if you were born in a very narrow time frame. So anyway, it's good to have a joke at these things, because Polly and I could do weddings and celebrations and stuff, but our chats are always pretty miserable. So I think it's good to get going from there. So I've been asked to cover why is a minimum income guarantee needed. And in some ways, the answer for this, I could do in about 10 seconds, go outside. I get asked this all the time on, the UK government have got some line that says, X number of people aren't in absolute poverty anymore. What do you say about that? Go outside. If you're a politician worth half your salt, and I wouldn't make the same criticism of the Scottish government at all. I think you do understand. You feel the pain that people are seeing in their communities. But if you're a UK government minister and you can't see that people are struggling in your communities, you're not looking hard enough. But I should be a wee bit more rigorous than that. So I'm going to show you a couple more lines. And this has gone a bit wonky on here, which is fine. But the only thing that's important about this, well, actually, there's lots of things that are important in this chart. But the most important thing is what I've called the grey mountain. So if this was lined up properly, this would show you the patterns of relative poverty levels over time. The different coloured lines show it for children, working age adults and pension. Actually, no, that's rubbish. They show the depth of poverty. So one is the standard poverty line, one is the deep poverty line, one is very deep poverty. But that grey mountain is the most important thing on here, because it shows the proportion of people in poverty who are in very deep poverty. So by very deep poverty, we mean less than 40% of the average income. The usual poverty line is 60%. So this shows that between the mid-1990s, approximately the time of PJ and Duncan, to the present time, there has been a massive increase in very deep poverty. Why? Has the weather changed? No. Government policy. Through the New Labour years, and definitely through the coalition years into the present UK government, social security support has been desperately cut for single people and for disabled people. And there you see, by design, very deep poverty has risen. That's why a minimum income guarantee is needed. We don't have that anymore. That's why Polly and her colleagues work so hard in Trussell Trust to keep people fed. We shouldn't, we talk about, I've been at lots of third sector events the last few weeks, and people talking about preparing warm banks for the winter. Stuff that. We want to live in a warm bank should be inside. Should be inside. It shouldn't be a thing we have to set up. And this is it, that grey mountain. And also, again, if I'd done this talk 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have to talk much about destitution. But destitution is an ingrained feature of the United Kingdom now. We published a report just last month. Almost 4 million people live in destitution, 1 million children. And as both Shirley-Anne and Polly have noted, these are not just statistics. These are people's lives. I mean, my son was playing with one of his pals the other day, and they were explaining to him about this great shop where you could go and you got free cereal. And I got chocolate Weetabix. It was great. Now that speaks to the brilliant, compassionate way in which the food pantry that she was talking about was run. But kids shouldn't be having those conversations. And in Scotland, I've put good news, and then I've written growth in capital letters, I've underlined it, I've put highlighted on it. I was going to put it in a bigger font, but it made it look funny. Scotland has comparatively done better in its growth of destitution over the last few years. Now, I say this, I think I said on the radio at the time, it wasn't time to get the bunting out, but it does also show the change that government decisions make. Scotland has the child payment. Scotland has a Scottish Welfare Fund, which doesn't exist as consistently across the rest of the UK. And there are places in Scotland where local government and third sector organisations, like many of them represented in the room, work closely together to avoid people ending up in destitution. But what do we mean destitution? People being hungry, people being cold, people not having the clothes that we need. So we are having some success in Scotland about the numbers, not the lid coming off them like they are elsewhere in the UK. But I don't know, Trussell trusts are still going. So, you know, things are not fixed. But here is a map of Scotland as well. The position is not uniform across the country. So the lighter greens you'll see there are the areas where there's a lower concentration of destitution, the darker areas higher. You see the very city within which we are is, again, at the kind of top of a league table you want to be nowhere near in Scotland. Again, why is a minimum income guarantee needed? Because destitution has no place in our country. We need to completely wipe it out. And a minimum income guarantee could be part of that. But a lot of our focus has, quite rightly, been on social security. Again, I'm not sure what's happened to the title on this, but let's roll with it. But social security will not be everyone's guarantee of a decent life and a decent income. For a lot of people, that will be work. But this graph shows that work isn't that reliable route out of poverty, which we've heard about before, and this is part of the reason why. This shows what we call persistent low pay. So looking at a 5-year period, people who have been paid below the real living wage are the group at the bottom. So 11%, over 1 in 10 workers in Scotland. And use the example for this is that we've often heard a kind of trope, which this shows is a myth, of the workplace, of people getting a new job, a very low-paid job, and being told, don't worry, son, stick in, and you'll do all right. And I use those words specifically because 75% almost of the people in that group of 11% at the bottom are women. So yeah, maybe if you are a son, you might get out of very low pay. But for many roles that women hold, so we know social care, hospitality, retail, these kind of industries, low pay is endemic, making it extremely difficult for people to escape poverty. It's why child poverty is so closely tied to women's poverty. That's workplace discrimination. We need to fix these things, or the bill for Shirley-Anne and our colleagues in the Scottish Government for Social Security keeps going up and up and up. And people's lives, the enrichment that good work can have in people's lives isn't available for far too many people. So this graph we need to change significantly. And that should be part of that guarantee. A guarantee that if you get a job, if you can get enough hours, if the support around you, like childcare, like transport, like social care, is there, you're able to get into work, you should be able to have a decent income. That has to be part of the guarantee too. And so I've put this as a question here. No one left behind. I mean, I doubt there's anybody in this room who doesn't know or see lots of people who are regularly left behind. That's far too many people's experiences in our country just now. And rather than the crap that we get out of the UK government about pushing folk into work or the help that they'll get by being sanctioned, who remembers at school going to your guidance teacher and thinking, right, the way you prepare for a job, what you need to be is cold, hungry, and wearing really old clothes, and actually not have enough money to get to your job interviews? No. So for me, a minimum income guarantee can be that transformational part of a society, a genuine foundation upon which all of us can build. Yes, we've got to fix the labour market. Yes, we need to look at childcare and all of these things, but there should be a safety net there for all of us, and we can build one right here in Scotland. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. And again, I think we've heard from Chris there some of the reasons why we urgently need to move towards a minimum income guarantee. What we have now is maybe about 10, 15 minutes for some questions, and really just to continue the discussion that the Cabinet Secretary, that Polly and that Chris have set out for us, that we'll carry on, that will lead throughout the rest of the day. So could I see some hands to put some questions to? And we have roving mics. I think I can see one hand over here. We'll maybe take a couple of questions, so if I could see a couple of hands at this point. And if you could say who you are before you ask your question. So we'll take one here, and then there's one at the back.
Edward Harkins from Rutherglen and Cambuslang Housing Association, a community-based housing association in South Lanarkshire. Can I say, first of all, I just about scraped through Polly's age test. I was born in 1950. But one of your charts here very starkly showed what we've lost. From my birth year of 1950 to when I was a teenager, 67 thereabouts, the support for all walks of life in the welfare state was on a steady, unprecedented state of increase. From that year onwards, we've been on a steep downward permanent spiral, downwards in almost every facet. So I found that quite sobering. My question is primarily for the Cabinet Secretary, but all the panel members. The Cabinet Secretary described the minimum income guarantee as potentially transformational. But in itself, of course, it's not a single silver bullet. Could you say a bit more about what you see, what other policy and practice measures you see having to be reinforced or brought in direct support of a minimum income guarantee to ensure it is indeed transformational? I would just add the introduction of rent freeze and rent controls in the housing sector already have offered us lessons about unintended consequences and how you have to think through in a kind of holistic way. Thank you.
Thanks, Edward. And there's a question at the back. If you just put your hand up again, we'll get the mic to you. Yep, thanks. We'll take these two questions and then we'll come to the Cabinet Secretary, and if Polly or Chris want to come in as well.
Hi, David Stewart from FedGap Scotland. Thank you to all the panel for the interesting contributions. Really resonate a lot of the things you're saying to me that we've been talking about in the past few months, and that we're in a real danger just now where practice is contradicting policy, where we talk about living wage employers, we talk about fair work agenda, but we can only commission things for 4 months or 5 months. The pressure on the sector and what people are having to deliver to support people is becoming insurmountable for some. You look at some of the headline information in Scotland just now, we have nearly 800,000 people that are economically inactive because of 30% because of ill health. We need 160,000 disabled people moving into work to half the disability employment gap, and we have 250,000 children roughly living in poverty. One local authority I spoke to last week, we're now at 1 in 2 children living in poverty, which is just horrendous. But yet, in Shirley-Anne, you mentioned, and Chris, a lot about, work used to be the best route out of poverty, and it's not now. But actually, how can we provide the long-term support that people need? How can we create really successful collaborative partnerships between large national providers and small local partners with expertise that people need to provide the sustainable, consistent opportunities that people need to get ready to move into fair work and then be given the opportunity to progress from that so they're not living in persistent low pay?
Great, thank you very much. I'll turn to you first, Shirley-Anne. That idea of transformational, I think I said at the start, we will hear that word a lot, and it would be good to hear what do you think are some of the key policies that would take us there?
So I'll maybe give some examples of where I think we've got a foundation and then where we can build on that. So aspects that we now take quite rightly, I think, for granted in Scotland would be transformational if you were bringing it in somewhere else, like free prescriptions. That is now something that happens in Scotland and we take for granted because we've had it for so long. But actually, if you look down south, we're at £10 per prescription, for example, and going up. So what we've already tried to do in Scotland is what we called at the time a kind of social contract, where you pay your taxes, you have a more progressive tax system in Scotland, and we're very keen to continue to look at that as a government. What do you get back from that? So we have public services that are not available elsewhere in the UK, and those are the types of examples that we can take and build on. So what other aspects that there are still charges, for example, in parts of the health service? There are still aspects around early learning and childcare, where we have universality for eligible 2s and 3s and 4s. So what next? How do we build that basket of public services to be able to take us from what we've got just now, which I think is a good foundation, to something that is genuinely more around what you would need as part of a minimum guarantee? So you've got some of the public services. We've talked a lot, quite rightly, about the adequacy of social security and looking at that, particularly after we've completed case transfer in social security, where we have much more freedom. And then the aspects which ties into parts of the second question around genuinely well-paid, secure work. And part of the challenge, yes, is getting people into work. And how do we do it? Well, we certainly don't do it through sanctions and scaring the bejesus out of people and taking their quite frankly, I think their basic rights away from them, which is what we're seeing as proposed from the UK government. And you have to have a system that works for everybody. So I think we've still got work to do in Scotland to make sure our no one left behind policy actually works for those that are furthest from the labour market, perhaps those that are disabled, those who have care experience, you know, the parts of our community that we know we need to get better at serving. So even where we have a universal offer, that's fine. Does it actually work for everybody? And I think that's a challenge that we have to look at seriously as a government to help people into work. And it is about help and support. And also then to make sure that they're getting into work that has a real living wage. Now, we don't have employment law devolved to Scotland, so there's some limitations to what we can do. But we do have businesses that actually demonstrate that this is good for business as well. I'm not saying particularly for small businesses in some sectors that this is easy, but we need to find a way to be able to improve that situation for them.
Thanks very much. Polly, Chris, you want to come back on any of those questions, any of those points?
Come back on some of the points the second gent raised. I think, like, on the work thing, I think we often within the sector get pushed into kind of accepting that, oh, if you're going to talk about benefits or social security, you need to say, oh, but people need to get into work. Like, I think, and I've had arguments with some senior civil servants about this, the social security system in our country at the minute is a structural cause of poverty. Right? It's created such a weakness within our society as a whole that you can see this within the third sectors. How many organisations have changed from doing so-called preventative work into crisis support? So that if you were trying to provide an employability service or something like that, housing support, actually that turns into, well, let's make sure people have got the lights on and they've got food. And so you're in a hide into nothing. Not a hide into nothing. People do achieve great things. We shouldn't be hopeless. But I think we have to push back to governments that having such a fundamentally low level of social security support for people makes all those other jobs so much harder. And things like puts pressure on NHS because of mental health struggles and all of these kind of things. But fundamentally, it does come back to that human thing. If you're going for a new job or you're trying to make a change in your life, that creates anxiety. That's natural. That's normal. But if you're worrying about where your kids' school uniform's coming from, or whether you can pay your rent, or whether your meter's going to run out, That's too much anxiety. Nobody can cope with that. Nobody can cope with that. We need to tip a bit of that anxiety out of people's buckets, give them a hand, and that has to come from having a decent income that you know is going to be there.
Polly.
Oh, so many things that I want to say, but I'll try and restrict it. So, David, your comments about the world of work. I mean, it's a mess. And I think I just want to call out precarious work, insecure contracts, not enough hours and low pay. We can really see, for the same graph, Edward, that your life represented on the screen earlier, for that same period we've seen collective bargaining, union density drop. We've seen, although that was comparing the level of universal credit and social security to wages have gone down. Whatever you've been hearing from the UK government, it is not true. They are not rising massively. You're not feeling a lot richer. Lots of you are working on contracts in the third sector that are shocking, that are 6 months long. You don't know till the week before whether you're going to have a job, and that's in our sector. That's in our own house. We can put that straight. So I think as a sector, we've been really nervous to talk about work. Don't be nervous to talk about work. It's the centre point of what makes everybody able to afford what they want, and then social security is meant to be the safety net. And I think that's one of the things why, when we talk about the transformational nature of the minimum income guarantee, why it's so important, because it ties together work and social security to make sure that people have got what they need. So I think if you're looking, Edward, for things that we can do till we get the minimum income guarantee, let's do a bit of work focusing on work. And I think a lot of the things we've done in Scotland, for understandable reasons to do with reserved powers around employment, have been focusing on good employers. Well, great, but it's the bad employers that are causing the problem, and I think we need to pay a bit more attention to them.
Thanks very much, Polly. I was going to do a shout out for both living wage and living hours, which I think these are things that are making a difference, but absolutely we need to think about some of those employers who are resistant. I know there was one question over here, and I think there's a hand at the back, so if we could maybe, the woman at the front, and then the gentleman at the back, and that will be the last of our questions. So if you could keep them brief, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi. Earlier on, you were talking about the essential costs of living. And recently, I've come across a problem with people with glasses. It doesn't matter if the person's in a well-paid job, retired, or on benefits like me. You go and you get a voucher to pay for your lenses. But the lenses, they had to go into special frames. So the cost of the frames, I know in the past I had to get a credit card to pay for my glasses. I'm dreading when I have to get my new glasses this time, but the same thing affects my sister. She's 65, so she's not quite on the pension, but she's not working. But everybody has such a problem with glasses.
Thanks very much. So I think a question there around the additional costs that might be incurred around disability. I think there was a question at the back, yeah. And if you could just say who you are and where you're from. If you're from an organisation, that'd be helpful as well. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I am Ishmael Yembasu, a community researcher for Poverty Alliance and the Many Voices. Chris, I really dove my heart to your last wording that reads, "No one is left behind," which is good. And I want to add the normal slogan that reads, "People make Glasgow." And my question is going to the Cabinet Secretary. Madam Secretary, is the MIG really meant for asylum seekers who normally live below £50 a week? They do not have no recourse to public funds, no right to work, and all is all against them. That's just my question.
So I think what can we do really to support a group that's facing the destitution that both Polly and Chris spoke about? Cabinet Secretary, I'll turn to you. I think we maybe, yes, we will. This will be our final comment, unfortunately, but over to you, Cabinet Secretary.
I think you raise a really important point that we need to challenge ourselves on, is that the minimum income guarantee has to work for everyone. However, there will be limitations to what we are allowed to do under the current settlement. And I think you've touched on an example of one of the weaknesses of where we are with devolution at the moment, because as Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, I get a list through from the UK government that tells me the devolved benefits that we are not allowed to give to people with no recourse to public funds. And clearly, as part of the current settlement, obviously asylum seekers are not allowed to work, etc. Now, we don't have the power to change that list. I can try, and we have asked. But if we do anything for those people, then that affects their asylum application. That is an absolute travesty, because the current situation is pushing people into destitution. It's way past poverty and absolutely into destitution. So we are very keen to look at what we can do for public services that we can provide for everyone, including those with no recourse to public funds, and the way that we can fund organisations to help people that allows me to work to the side of that prohibitive list that I get from the UK government. For example, the money that we give to the Red Cross to work with community organisations for those that are destitute because they are part of the asylum system. So I suppose the answer to your question is I don't know whether we can get a minimum income guarantee that we will be allowed to give to people with no recourse to public funds, but it will not be for the lack of trying and the determination of the Scottish Government in that. And if we can't get to the full minimum income guarantee, then what can we do within the powers that we have for around public services, for example, that will at least provide some of the support that everybody should have the right to have, including those in our asylum process.
Thanks very much. And could I thank Shirley-Anne and both Chris and Polly for their contributions this morning. I think they've highlighted really some of the challenges that we face in trying to develop a minimum income guarantee. That final point there about how people who are in the asylum process could potentially benefit. There are real challenges, there are tough questions that we have to face, and that's what we're going to focus the rest of our day on, is looking at those tough questions and those challenges and trying to find some answers to them as we develop a minimum income guarantee. I think Polly and Chris have already identified some areas where we could really make progress, I think, quite quickly in Scotland over the next few years. So lots for us to discuss. Just a reminder, you're going into a break now for about 20 minutes. You'll then go into your workshops. One on debt is in the Buchanan Suite. One on achieving an adequate income in rural Scotland is in the Lomond Foyer. Securing financial security for all, that's looking at those very issues around asylum, is in the City of Music studio upstairs. And back in here is improving health, and the link with the minimum income guarantee. Just before you go, before I set you free, just to remind you, if you haven't noticed already, we have a graphic recorder, Eddie from New Possibilities, who is donating his time to us today, so thank you very much for that, Eddie. He's drawing away at the back of the room, so go and check that out during the day. You have a petition in your bags from Better Buses Strathclyde. If you wish, please sign and return that. There's a photo exhibition out in the hall from the Rights in Action project that the Poverty Alliance runs. That's a photo wall project that's been carried out with community activists linked to Maryhill Integration Network. Go and check that out during the breaks. And photos will be taken throughout the day. If you don't want your photo used, just let us know and we'll make sure it isn't used. Enjoy your coffee. You're back in here, if you wish to be, at 1 o'clock for the Poverty Alliance AGM. But otherwise, enjoy your workshops. And thank you again to all our speakers.